this is Lady Boulay, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today's feature is Bessie Elizabeth Coleman. Bessie Coleman was one of the first women to fly an airplane in the United States. It was in the 1920s. Women had just gotten the right to vote. Black Americans were still undergoing Jim Crow, but Bessie Coleman was flying an airplane. Bessie was doing in the 1920s what the Blue Angels are doing now. She was a pioneer of the acrobatic air shows. She was born in 1892 in Atlanta, Texas. I did not think there was any such place as Atlanta, Texas, but it turns out that it is. She was born into a large family, 13 children. She went to a church school in a nearby town, and Bessie even went to Langston University for a year, but she wasn't able to stay because of financial reasons. She had two brothers living in Chicago, so she went to live with her brothers in Chicago. They had served in the military during World War I in France, and so they were telling stories about French women flying airplanes. And this piqued Bessie's interest. So she started reading stories about air adventures and about flying, and she became really enamored with the idea of learning how to fly. Now, in 1919, in the United States, there was nobody that was going to teach a black woman how to fly an airplane. This was an area that Bessie was determined to overcome. Aviation was new in the 1920s. It was the new technology, so everybody was talking about it. Bessie went to beauty school and took up the art of manicuring. She got a job as a manicurist in a barbershop. Even in the barbershop, they were talking about flying adventures, telling great stories about men flying. Little did they know that the young manicurist was planning her own flying adventures. Bessie took a second job in a restaurant to save money in hopes of financing her dream. She also became acquainted with the publisher of the Chicago Defender, Robert Abbott, who was also African American. The Chicago Defender is an African American newspaper. He began writing stories about her desire to fly. This was a bold dream for a black woman in 1919, but this man got on board with her dream and became her mentor. He urged her to take a French-speaking class. He also encouraged her to apply to a French flying school. Going to France was the key to realizing her dream. Finally, on November 20th of 1920, Bessie was on her way to France. She stayed for 7 months learning to fly an airplane. Her instructors said she was a very good student. At the end of the 7 months, she had her pilot's license, and she returned to the United States flying a plane. Air travel was not common in 1921. People didn't get on airplanes and go from place to place. So Bessie quickly realized that if she was going to make a living flying an airplane, she would have to become a barnstormer, doing dangerous tricks and taking chances with her life. She did not have the skills for that, so she returned to Europe, where she studied for several months with some of the best pilots and some of the most advanced pilots in Europe. She learned the techniques and tactics of stunt flying, and when she returned to the United States, she had mastered the skills of exhibition flying. She made her first appearance on September 1922 near Long Island, New York, and she was billed as the world's greatest woman flyer, and it was sponsored by her old friend and mentor, Robert Abbott. This event was done to honor the 369th Infantry from Harlem, New York, called the Harlem Hellfighters, and she was an immediate sensation. And she was just getting started. She was a fearless daredevil doing nail-biting stunts. With the airplane, she was making figure eights, dipping low to the ground and shooting back up into the sky, speed flying, and she was doing the loop-de-loops, doing the barnstorming that the crowds loved. I found it astonishing that she was also parachuting, jumping out of the plane. She was earning the title as the world's greatest woman flyer. She was popular in both America and Europe. The Europeans knew that she had studied over there, so they were invested in her too. She became the darling of the black press, although they often criticized her flamboyant style and her opportunistic nature. Nevertheless, they all agreed that she was a superstar and that she was a credit to the black race. To be sure, racism was alive and well in the 1920s. Segregation was the order of the day. But Bessie put her foot down on one thing. She insisted that when they came to her air shows, blacks and whites had to come through the same gate. They couldn't have a colored and white gate. In today's society, that sounds like a very small thing to ask. But in 1923, that was a big thing to ask. Bessie had high hopes for what she wanted to accomplish. She wanted to do something to really uplift the black race. She wanted to open a school so black girls would learn how to fly. She wanted to do many things to advance the society. She was very conscious about how she had been treated as a black woman, and she really wanted to improve things for black people. Unfortunately, Bessie did not live long enough to realize all of her dreams. She had chosen a dangerous profession. In 1923, she'd been involved in a plane crash. She'd been seriously injured, but she recovered. She bought her own airplane, which was one of her dreams. The plane was not new, and it was not in good condition. She flew the plane from Dallas, Texas to Jacksonville, Florida. She and her mechanic were flying together and had to stop to service the plane several times. Upon learning this, her family had asked her not to fly the plane and not to do the show the next day. But Bessie was determined to do the show. Apparently, the plane was serviced again. Bessie and her mechanic went up to do a rehearsal. He was flying the plane, and she was going to jump out of the plane as a part of her stunt, so she was not wearing her seatbelt. But early into the flight, the engine jammed, the plane crashed, and Bessie Coleman was tragically killed, as was her mechanic. Upon examining the crash, it was discovered that the wrench had been left in the engine, and that was what caused the plane to crash. The African American community was devastated over the death of Bessie Coleman. Bessie died April the 30th, 1926. She was 34 years old. Bessie Coleman's story has not been told in the annals of American history, as much of African American history is buried. So we didn't know about her. People who did not live in that time didn't hear about her for a long, long time. But the cream has a way of rising to the top, and Bessie has risen to the top, so that now we hear quite a bit about Bessie and her accomplishments. No woman has come along to challenge what she did. Amelia Earhart is the name that we hear about when we talk about early women flyers. Bessie certainly came before Amelia Earhart, and they had different itineraries. Bessie was a stunt flyer, flying for entertainment. Amelia Earhart was more of an adventure flyer, doing distance flying, flying across oceans and setting records in that way. But each woman is her own historic figure, and each woman set her own historic records. We cannot overlook the fact that racism played a part in Bessie's accomplishments being buried for so long, but she's being recognized now. Dr. Mae Jemison, the first African American woman astronaut, carried a picture of Bessie Coleman with her on her first out-of-space flight. Bessie has been inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame, the National Aviation Hall of Fame, the International Hall of Fame at the San Diego Air and Space Museum. She placed number 14 on Flying Magazine's 51 Heroes of Aviation. She's been a cartoon character on a television show called Dr. McStuffins. She appears everywhere. There's a doll named after her. In every African American museum, Bessie is featured. Schools, streets, airports, air streets, libraries, any number of institutions are named after her. She is being honored, and is not a moment too soon. Just a touch of irony. Although Bessie had to go to Europe to get the training to become a pilot, Once she returned to the United States with her extraordinary skills, she was quickly accepted. Flying shows sought after her. She had no trouble getting work. She was popular with both black and white people. Bessie Coleman added flair, spice, and substance to the African American experience and culture. She's a credit to her race and to her country. And I say, thank you, Bessie. Rest in peace.